Hello students, this is Mr. Damiani and we are looking at lesson 2.2 on page 75 in your workbook, so please locate page 75. Also, as we work through this lesson, you're going to want to make sure you have a separate piece of paper available just to work out any of this, long division, or if you want to space your workout and that type of stuff. So if you'd like to go ahead and get some materials set, please pause the video and get those materials together. All right, the topic for today's lesson is compare and order fractions and decimals. So we are comparing and ordering rational numbers. The essential question for today, how can you compare and order fractions and decimals? So we're going to be looking at a variety of ways to compare fractions with fractions, fractions with decimals, decimals, and compare them. And order them, which means getting them from least to greatest and greatest to least. What I'd like to do is have you go ahead and turn to page 77 in your workbook. We are looking for the share and show. All right, we are going to attack lesson 2.2 on page 77 through the share and show. So please follow along. Any of the work I'm writing down, I'd like you to go ahead and fill in. You could do it in the workbook or on a separate piece of paper. All right, here we go. Directions say order from least to greatest. So I have three mixed numbers here in question 1. I am looking at 3 and 3/6, 3 and 5/8, 2 and 9/10, and I'm trying to get them from least to greatest. So the very first thing I'd like to locate here would be our whole number. So I'll notice I have a whole number of 3. Sorry about that. Another whole number of 3 and a whole number of 2. So if I'm ordering them from least to greatest, I know the smallest value is going to have the whole number of 2. So I'm just going to go ahead and write 2 and 9/10 on my line. That is our smallest value. So anytime we're comparing fractions or mixed numbers, ordering them, always look at your whole numbers first. That can save us a small step. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the fractions 3 and 3/6 and 3 and 5/8, and I'm going to write them using a common denominator. This common denominator will allow me to compare my numerators in order to find that smaller or greater value. So I have the denominators of 6 and 8. I'm going to take 6 and 8 and I'm going to get them in the ladder. I'm going to find my factor that goes into both 6 and 8, which is a 2. That leaves me a 3 and a 4. And I'm going to find the LCM of that, because the LCM will be the LCD, the least common denominator. So 2 times 3 is 6, times 4 is 24. So I know right now that my least common denominator is 24. So in order to get a common denominator, in order to get a common denominator of 24 here for 3 and 3/6, I multiply 6 by 4, 3 by 4, and that gives me a new numerator of 12. So I have 3 and 12 24ths. Now to end up with a denominator of 24 over here for my 3 and 5/8, I'm going to do 8 times 3 and 5 times 3, multiplying the top and bottom of that fraction to get an equivalent fraction. That's what we're doing there, and I end up with 15 24ths here. So when I'm looking at this, I can tell that 12 is less than 15, so that means 3 and 3/6 is my middle value, and 3 and 5/8 is just a little bit bigger. And you'll notice that I used the original version here, not my equivalent version. I have to always put my originals back in my answer. All right, so that's how you could go ahead and order fractions from least to greatest by finding a common denominator. What I'd like you to do now is let's take a look at questions 2, 3, and 4. All right, directions say write less than, greater than, or equal to. So now we're going to be comparing different forms of numbers. So this is where we're going to be looking at decimals and fractions, trying to decide which one's less than, which one's greater than, or maybe they're equal to. So we have a couple options here. We can take our decimals and write them as fractions, or we could take our fractions and write them as decimals. If we do write them as fractions, we would have to go through that common denominator process. If we write them as decimals, we could simply compare our place values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at question 2 here, and I'm going to change 4/12 into a decimal, and then I'm going to compare from there. All right, so this is where you might want a separate piece of paper, all right, to be able to work out 4/12 in decimal form, because we are limited for space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work out question 2 right here. Okay, so I have 4/12, and if you remember dump and divide from lesson 2.1, I'm going to add a decimal point and a 0 and a decimal point. So here we go. 12 into 4, 0 times. 12 into 40, 3 times. 3 times 12 gives me that 36. And I'm going to subtract down, knock that down, regroup, and end up with a 4. And I fill in a 0 because I don't want a remainder, and I get another 40. Well, 12 goes into 43 times. What I'm seeing here is a definite pattern. This means I have a repeating decimal, and the digit that's repeating is the 0.3. So what I actually have here is 0.3 repeating. All right, that's how we write that. So if I'm going to compare 0.3 repeating with 0.8, okay, I could tell that 3 in the tenths place is less than the 8. So what this means is that 0.08 is greater than 4/12. All right, so changing the fraction into a decimal. Let's move our attention to question 3 here. Question 3, I'm comparing 22 hundredths, or 0.22, to 1/4. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this 1/4 and I'm going to change that over. Now, some of us know our quarters, so some of us know that 1/4 is equal to 0.25 because that's 1/4. If you don't, well, we got to work out the long division. So you can move your attention down here, number 3. All right, and again, this is the work that I'd expect to see on a separate piece of paper. So now I'm going to go ahead and change 1/4 into a decimal. 1 in the house, 4 in the driveway, decimal point 0. Working through our long division steps. 0, 4 in the 10, 2 times, that gives me an 8. I subtract, I get a 2, bring a 0, drop it down, and I get a 5. And that's where we end up with that 0.25. Yay, I'm happy. So 0.25. So now if we're looking at this, 0.22 compared to 0.25, notice how I'm stacking my decimal points. That's a great way to compare decimals. I look at my tenths place here and I notice I have a 2, so that's not going to help us. And then I go to my hundredths place and I notice I have a 5 and a 2. So I know a 5 in the hundredths place over a 2 means 0.25 is greater, which means 0.22 is less than 1/4. All right, let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and jump down to question 5. So I'm going to go ahead and erase my scrap work here. Now again, that would have been on a separate piece of paper for you. And I'm going to get us a move up here. There we go. All right, so use a number line to order from least to greatest. So we can use a number line to help us organize decimal points from least to greatest. So I notice when I'm looking at question 5 here, I have a mixed number, a fraction form, and then I have a decimal and another mixed number. So I look at my number line here, and I notice that all of my number line is written in decimal form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these fractions and I'm going to get them into decimal form. The first one that I can place, 1.25, is already in that's already in decimal form, so I'm going to go ahead and get that on there. When I'm looking at my number line, I'll notice I go from 1 to 2, and I've got a bunch of lines in between. So here would be my 0.2, which means 0.25 would probably be one space after. So if we go with, this is going to be a, let's see, 0.05 here. And then that means this would be a 1.1, 1.15, 1.12, And that means right here is going to be 1.25. All right. It's always a little bit of a challenge to figure out how these pre-labeled number lines, are really counting by. So let's take a look at 1 1/10 now. If you notice 1 1/10, when I say that, some of us can picture 1.1, 1 1/10. If not, then I would have had to have dumped and divided the 1 into 10, and then you would have got that 0.1. Now, locating 1.1 on this number line, that means that we're going to be to the left of the 1.2. If this is 0.05, then that means 0.1 would be right here, and that's going to be 1.1. Okay, and let's take a look at 1 1/4 now. 1 4/5. So here's our 1 4/5, and I'm going to have to dump and divide with my fifths. So 4 in the house, 5 in the driveway, decimal point, and 0. Bring up my decimal point. 5 into 4, 0 times. 5 into 40, 8 times. That gives me a 40. That gives me a 0. Nothing left to bring down. Yay. And that's going to leave me with 1 because of my whole number, 0.8. Now I have to come up to the number line, locate 1.8. And I can say life is good because 1.8 is already identified on my number line. I do not have to count off and search. Okay, so now if I'm ordering from least to greatest here, then that means the smallest value I have is on the left. So that's the 1.1. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the 1 1/10. I have to put my original amount. Don't forget that. My next value as I slide to the right here is 1.25, and that is an original, so I put that in there. And then I continue to slide to the right, and I get the 1.8, which was originally 1.45. Okay, so in case you haven't noticed, we've pulled on our knowledge of how to change a fraction into a decimal and how to change a decimal into a fraction in order to compare and order. What I'd like you to do now is go ahead and look at the bottom of the page here, the on your own section. What I'm going to have you do is I would like you to answer a couple questions independently, and then we'll go over these answers when we check the work tomorrow. So I'm going to give you 2 questions to answer. Underneath the set of directions here, order from least to greatest, I'd like you to circle question 6. And on question 6, I'm going to give you a hint. You're going to want to take 4/5, and you're going to want to write that as a decimal. And then order from least to greatest. Down below here, question 10. And I'm going to have you answer question 11. All right, we have some comparison, less than, greater than, or equal to. A hint for question 10, you can find a common denominator or change them both into decimals. And for question 11, I would take my fraction and change it into a decimal and compare that way. Okay, I'd like to say thank you for taking the time to watch the video lesson. I hope it was helpful. And again, if you have any questions, please write those questions down on a post-it note so we can answer those questions tomorrow. Have a great evening, and goodbye.